Robert Carver wiped grease from his hands with a shop rag, the familiar smell of motor oil and salt air mixing in his nostrils. Friday afternoon at the marina meant one thing: weekend warriors would be back Monday with broken props and burned engines. He built his reputation fixing what other people broke, turning their weekend disasters into steady income. The afternoon sun slanted through the open bay doors of his shop, illuminating dust motes that danced above scattered engine parts. 3 outboard motors sat in various stages of repair, their guts exposed like mechanical autopsies. Robert had been elbow-deep in a seized engine block when the distinctive chime of his front door cut through the steady hum of his air compressor. Zoe stepped inside, her school counselor smile bright and practiced. John bounced behind her, backpack still slung over his shoulders, sneakers squeaking against the concrete floor. "Daddy!" John ran to him, wrapping thin arms around Robert's waist. "Mom says we're going to the beach this weekend." Robert looked up at his wife, setting down the wrench he'd been using. Zoe hated the beach, hated sand between her toes, hated the sun, hated the crowds. In 9 years of marriage, she'd suggested the beach exactly 0 times. She barely tolerated their annual trips to Myrtle Beach, spending most of her time under umbrellas reading books and checking her phone. That right, Robert wiped his hands more thoroughly, buying time to study her expression. What brought this on? Zoe's smile never wavered, but her eyes darted briefly to the stack of mail on his workbench. "John's been working so hard in school. I thought he deserved a treat." She ruffled their son's hair with movements that seemed forced. "Plus, we haven't spent enough family time together lately." The words felt rehearsed, like dialogue she'd practiced in front of a mirror. Robert studied her face, searching for tells the slight tension around her eyes when she lied, the way her left hand tapped against her leg when nervous. 20 years in the Navy had taught him to read people, to spot the micro-expressions that revealed true intentions. Something was definitely off. "Since when do you plan spontaneous trips?" Robert asked, keeping his tone light for John's benefit. "I can be spontaneous." Zoe's defensive edge leaked through despite her attempt at casual conversation. "Remember last summer when I suggested camping? You said you needed 2 weeks' notice to pack properly." John giggled. "Mom brought 3 suitcases for one night." "That was different," Zoe said quickly. "This is just a day trip. Pack some sandwiches, grab the beach gear. Can we go to Hunting Island?" John bounced on his toes. "Please? I want to show you the lighthouse." "Sure, buddy." Robert kept watching Zoe. "When were you thinking?" "Tomorrow morning. I already packed the cooler and beach bag." She glanced around his shop, nose wrinkling slightly. "You should probably shower first." John giggled. "Dad always smells like boats." "Boats pay for your video games," Robert said, tickling his son's ribs. John squealed and darted away. That night, Robert found Zoe packing beach supplies in the kitchen. She'd spread everything across the granite countertowels, snacks, drinks, and a collection of bottles he didn't recognize. The organized display looked more like preparation for a military operation than a family beach day. "New sunscreen." He picked up one of the tubes. The label was printed in what looked like German, with small English text below. The brand name meant nothing to him, not one of the drugstore standards they'd used for years. "I ordered it online. Supposed to be much better than the drugstore stuff." Zoe took the bottle from his hands with quick, nervous movements. "European formula. More effective protection." Robert frowned, turning the bottle to read the ingredients list. The names were long chemical compounds he couldn't pronounce. "We've always used the same brand. Works fine for us. This is better for sensitive skin. John burns so easily." She capped the bottle and dropped it into the beach bag with deliberate finality. "Trust me, I researched it thoroughly." "Where do you find it?" "Specialty skincare website. They had amazing reviews." Zoe began folding towels with sharp, precise movements. "Sometimes you have to pay more for quality." Robert picked up another bottle from the counter. This one had different labeling, entirely a standard American brand he recognized. "What's this one for?" "That's mine. Different SPF rating." Zoe snatched it away before he could read the label. "I have different skin needs than you and John." "Since when?" "Since always. You just never paid attention." The accusation hung between them. Robert had spent enough years in hostile territory to recognize when someone was deflecting, changing the subject to avoid uncomfortable questions. But this was his wife, not an enemy combatant. He forced himself to step back. "Fair enough," he said. "You know skin care better than I do." The next morning dawned clear and hot. John chattered excitedly from the back seat as they drove toward Hunting Island. Robert caught Zoe's eyes in the rearview mirror. She was staring out the window, fingers drumming against her leg. The beach stretched empty before them, waves rolling steady under a cloudless sky. The morning sun already felt intense, promising a scorching afternoon. John immediately began building a sand fortress while Robert set up their umbrella and chairs, the familiar routine of family beach days. The sand was perfect, not too coarse, not too fine. John had chosen a spot just beyond the high tide line where the sand was damp enough to hold shape, but dry enough to work with. Robert watched his son's focused concentration as small hands shaped walls and towers with the dedication of a master architect. "Sunscreen time," Zoe called out, pulling the bottles from her beach bag with theatrical enthusiasm. John groaned but trotted over, sandy hands leaving prints on his swim trunks. "Do I have to? I just got my castle started." "Yes, you have to." Zoe unscrewed one of the caps with careful precision. "The sun's already getting strong. Come here." She squeezed a generous amount into her palm, more than Robert had ever seen her use at once. The cream was thicker than their usual brand, with a slight yellow tint that caught the sunlight. Robert watched as she rubbed it carefully into John's arms and shoulders, working the lotion into every crease and corner. "This stuff smells weird." John wrinkled his nose, trying to pull away. "All sunscreen smells weird," Zoe said, her grip firm on his arm. "Turn around. I need to get your back." She worked methodically, covering every inch of exposed skin with almost clinical precision. Her movements were different from previous beach trips, more thorough, more deliberate. She paid special attention to his shoulders and neck, areas that typically burned first. "Mom, that's enough," John protested as she continued rubbing. "I want to make sure it's absorbed properly. This formula works differently than our old stuff." She squeezed more lotion onto her hands. "Hold still for your face." When she finished with John, she turned to Robert with the same intense focus. "Your turn." Robert held out his arm. The cream felt cold and oily against his skin, heavier than anything he'd used before. Zoe's hands moved with the same clinical precision she'd used on John, spreading the lotion across his shoulders and neck with unusual care. "This feels different," Robert said, trying to place the strange sensation. "European formulations are more concentrated, longer-lasting protection." Zoe squeezed another large amount onto her palm. "Don't forget your face." She rubbed the cream into his cheeks and forehead, her touch gentle but thorough. The lotion left a slight film on his skin that didn't seem to absorb completely. When she finished, she wiped her hands on a towel with quick, almost frantic movements. "Aren't you using the same stuff?" Robert asked, noting how quickly she'd cleaned her hands. "Mine's a different SPF. I burn differently than you two." She pulled out the other bottle, a standard American brand with familiar packaging. "My dermatologist recommended this specific formula for my skin type." Robert watched as she applied her own sunscreen with casual, quick movements. A light coating on her arms and legs, barely enough to leave sheen. The contrast was stark. She'd spent 10 minutes carefully covering him and John, but less than 30 seconds on herself. They spent the day swimming and building sandcastles. John found shells and shark teeth while Robert dozed under the umbrella. Zoe sat in the shade, reading a book and checking her phone. As the sun climbed higher, Robert felt heat prickling his shoulders, not the normal warmth of sun exposure, but something sharper, more aggressive. He'd spent countless hours on boats and beaches, knew the difference between healthy sun and dangerous burn. This felt wrong from the start. By noon, the sensation had intensified. His arms felt like they were radiating heat from within. John complained about feeling itchy and hot, constantly adjusting his position on the sand. "Dad, my back feels funny," John said, reaching over his shoulder to scratch. Robert examined his son's shoulder blades. The skin looked redder than it should after such a short exposure, especially with heavy sunscreen application. "Don't scratch, buddy." Let's get you in the shade. They moved under the umbrella, but the burning sensation continued to build. Robert's face felt tight and swollen, like he'd been slapped repeatedly. This wasn't normal sunburn, this was something else entirely. Maybe we should head home, Robert suggested. Already, Zoe looked up from her book, skin still pale and unmarked. We just got here. John's burning up. He looks fine to me. She glanced at their son dismissively. Kids complain about everything. But as the afternoon wore on, even Zoe couldn't ignore the obvious signs. John's shoulders had developed angry red patches that looked more like burns than sun exposure. Robert's arms and face were beginning to blister. During the drive home, John cried softly in the back seat. It hurts, Dad. I know, buddy. We'll put some aloe on it when we get home. But that evening, as Robert stood in the bathroom mirror, he knew this wasn't ordinary sunburn. Red welts covered his shoulders and arms like someone had splashed him with acid. His face looked raw and angry, skin tight and swollen. Small blisters had formed along his collarbone, filled with clear fluid that caught the bathroom light. Jesus, he muttered, touching one gently. It felt like touching a live coal. John's condition was worse. The boy's back and arms were covered in fluid-filled blisters, some as large as quarters. The largest ones had begun to merge, creating patches of damaged skin that looked like severe chemical burns. Mom, John called out, his voice high and frightened. It hurts really bad. Zoe appeared in the doorway, her skin barely pink despite spending the entire day in direct sunlight. Oh my goodness. You two really got burned. This isn't sunburn. Robert met her eyes in the mirror. Look at these blisters. Maybe you're having an allergic reaction to the new sunscreen. Then why aren't you? I used a different formula, remember? She reached for John with practiced concern. Come on, sweetie. Let's get you in a cool bath. Robert watched his wife guide their injured son toward the bathroom, her movements efficient and calm. Too calm for someone seeing her family in obvious distress. A mother's first instinct should be panic, not procedure. Monday morning, John couldn't keep his shirt on. The blisters had spread across his chest and back, some as large as quarters. The worst ones had begun to weep clear fluid that stained his pajamas. Robert's condition had worsened too. His arms looked like he'd been splashed with industrial acid, the skin raw and angry beneath patches of damaged tissue. We're going to the emergency room, Robert said, watching John try to find a comfortable position on the kitchen chair. Zoe stood at the counter, pouring coffee with steady hands. Don't you think you're overreacting? It's just a bad burn. Look at him. Robert gestured toward John, who sat carefully on the edge of a chair, unable to lean back against anything. This isn't normal. Kids heal fast. Give it a few days. He needs medical attention. Now, Zoe sighed with the practiced patience of someone dealing with an unreasonable child. Fine, if it makes you feel better. Dr. Jonah Mallon met them at the hospital emergency room. Robert had served with Jonah in Afghanistan, trusted him more than any other doctor in town. Jonah took one look at John and immediately ushered them into a private examination room. How long since sun exposure? Jonah asked, pulling on gloves with practiced efficiency. Saturday, about 36 hours. Jonah examined John first, his face growing increasingly grim as he documented each blister. He photographed the worst areas and measured them with a ruler, making detailed notes on a tablet. The clinical documentation felt ominous, like evidence collection rather than routine medical care. Turn around, son. Let me see your back. John complied, wincing as the movement pulled at damaged skin. Jonah's sharp intake of breath was audible. Robert, look at this pattern. Jonah pointed to the distribution of blisters across John's shoulders. See how the damage follows exact application lines? This isn't random sun exposure. Robert studied his son's injuries with new eyes. The worst damage formed distinct boundaries, as if someone had painted invisible lines across his skin. Areas that should have been protected by clothing showed the same pattern of burns. Then Jonah turned to Robert, examining his arms and face with the same clinical intensity. He took more photographs, more measurements, more detailed notes. Same pattern, Jonah muttered, studying Robert's arms. Exact same distribution. When the examination finished, Jonah pulled up a chair and sat down heavily. This isn't sunburn. he said finally. These are chemical burns. What do you mean? Phototoxic reaction. Something on your skin reacted with UV light to cause tissue damage. Jonah's voice was steady but cold. The blistering pattern, the depth of penetration, this is severe chemical damage. Robert felt ice forming in his stomach. How severe? John will need skin grafts if these blisters get infected. You might too. Jonah leaned forward, his expression deadly serious. The scarring will be permanent. Some of these burns go down to the dermis. But it was just sunscreen. Was it? Jonah pulled out his tablet and showed Robert a series of medical photographs. I've seen phototoxic reactions before. Military chemical exposure, industrial accidents. This level of damage requires specific compounds, plant-based photosensitizers that activate under UV light. Robert stared at the images on the screen. Chemical burns. Deliberate damage. His mind refused to process the implications. What did you put on your skin before sun exposure? Jonah asked. Sunscreen. My wife applied it. Just sunscreen? Nothing else. New brand. Something she ordered online. Jonah was quiet for a long moment, studying the notes on his tablet. Finally, he looked directly at Robert with the same intensity he'd shown during their deployment briefings. I need to ask you something, and I want you to think carefully before you answer. Robert nodded, his throat suddenly dry. Do you have any reason to believe someone might want to hurt you? The question hit like a physical blow. What are you saying? I'm saying this looks deliberate. Jonah's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. Someone mixed photosensitizing compounds into that sunscreen. Someone with chemistry knowledge who understood exactly what would happen under UV exposure. That's insane. Is it? Jonah leaned forward. Who applied the sunscreen? My wife. Did she use the same product on herself? Robert thought back to the beach. Zoe with her separate bottle, different formula, barely pink while he and John looked like burn victims. The careful way she'd applied their sunscreen versus the casual way she'd covered herself. No, he said quietly. She used something different. Jonah nodded grimly. Robert, as your friend and your doctor, I'm telling you go to the police. This wasn't an accident. Robert drove home in silence, Jonah's words echoing in his head. John dozed in the back seat, medicated and bandaged. The boy would be out of school for at least a week. Zoe was waiting when they pulled into the driveway. She rushed to help John out of the car, all concern and gentle touches. What did the doctor say? Chemical burns, Robert said flatly. Zoe's face crumbled. Oh no, from a sunscreen. Apparently. I can't believe it. Those reviews online were so good. She helped John toward the house. I'm calling the company tomorrow. This is unacceptable. Robert followed them inside, watching his wife's performance. If she was acting, she was good at it. But Navy training had taught him to trust his gut, and his gut was screaming warnings. That evening, while Zoe helped John with a bath, Robert went to the garage. He found the beach bag exactly where she'd left it, towels still sandy, empty water bottles scattered in the bottom. The sunscreen tube was there too, about half empty. Robert held it up to the light. The cream inside had separated slightly, creating thin layers of different colors that he photographed the bottle from every angle, then sealed it in a plastic bag. The contaminated towels went into another bag. The beach bag itself went into a third. What are you doing? Robert spun around. Zoe stood in the garage doorway, arms crossed. Preserving evidence. Evidence of what? Chemical burns, Zoe. On our son. Robert sealed the final bag. Someone's going to test this stuff. You're being paranoid. Am I? He faced her directly. Show me the bottle you used. What? Your sunscreen. The different formula. Show me. Zoe hesitated. I threw it away. When? Yesterday. It was empty. Empty from one day at the beach. I used a lot. I reapplied several times. Robert stared at her. In 9 years of marriage, he'd never seen Zoe reapply sunscreen once. She hated the greasy feeling. Where did you throw it? The kitchen trash. But the garbage went out this morning. How convenient. Robert nodded slowly. I'm taking this stuff to be tested. That's a waste of money. Just call the company and complain. No. Robert's voice was flat and final. I'm testing it. Zoe's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Fine. Waste our money if it makes you feel better. She turned and walked back into the house. Robert stood alone in the garage, holding bags of evidence and feeling like a stranger in his own life. Tuesday morning, Robert called his sister Dell from his shop, where he'd been hiding since dawn. She arrived within an hour, took one look at John's bandages through the kitchen window, and immediately wanted to know where Zoe was. School. Emergency faculty meeting about budget cuts. Robert poured coffee with hands that shook slightly from exhaustion and medication. Dell, I need to ask you something. Shoot. Has Zoe seemed different to you lately? More distant? Acting strange. Dell snorted, settling into a kitchen chair with the solid presence of someone who'd never minced words. She's always seemed different to me. Question is, why are you finally asking? Robert told her about the beach trip, the burns, Jonah's suspicions. Dell listened without interrupting, her face growing darker with each detail. Her baker's hands strong from years of kneading dough and lifting heavy equipment clenched into fists on the table. That poisonous witch, she said finally. We don't know. We don't know nothing. I've been telling you for years something was wrong with her. Dell stood up, pacing the kitchen with barely contained fury. Remember Christmas when she accidentally served you that seafood salad? You broke out in hives so bad we thought you'd need an ambulance. I'm allergic to shellfish. She forgot my ass. She's been trying to kill you in tiny pieces for years, and you've been too blind to see it. Robert wanted to argue, but doubt was eating at him like acid. Small incidents over the years, food poisoning that only affected him, mysterious rashes after using new laundry detergent, unexplained dizzy spells after drinking coffee she'd made special for him. I need proof, he said quietly. Then let's find some. Dell pulled out her phone with the determination of someone about to solve a puzzle. John's still logged into the family tablet. Yeah, why? Because your wife's an idiot who doesn't understand technology. Dell's fingers flew across the screen with surprising efficiency. John showed me this cool feature last month while I was babysitting. Screen recording. Kid's been making videos of his games to show his friends. She navigated to John's user profile and opened his video gallery. Most of the recordings showed him playing games or watching cartoons, his excited commentary providing background noise to animated adventures. But there, buried in the middle of dozens of innocent videos, was a 20-minute recording from 2 weeks ago. Bingo, Dell whispered. The video showed the tablet's home screen, then switched to a messaging app that Robert didn't recognize. Zoe's profile was clearly visible, her school photo, smiling from the corner along with a conversation thread labeled Emery. Robert's blood turned to ice as he read the name. Emery Vale, environmental consultant who'd done some work for the school district last year. Quiet guy with intense eyes and an attitude that suggested he thought everyone else was intellectually inferior. Dell pressed play, and Robert watched in growing horror as his wife's messages scrolled past. He's getting suspicious about money again. Going through bank statements. When can we be together properly? I'm tired of sneaking around. I can't keep pretending to love him much longer. It's making me sick. Emery's responses were equally damning. Soon, once he's out of the way, we can have everything we want. John won't remember the pain in a few years. Kids are resilient. You'll be free to live your real life instead of this suburban prison. The conversation continued for pages. Financial planning discussions, insurance policy details, references to Robert's business income, and detailed bank account information that Zoe shouldn't have had access to. Keep watching, Dell said grimly. It gets worse. More recent messages appeared, dated just days before the beach trip. I found the perfect solution. Clean and accidental. Are you sure it will work? What if someone gets suspicious? Trust me. UV-activated compounds. He'll think it's severe sunburn until the damage is irreversible. What about John? I don't want him seriously hurt. Collateral damage. Sorry, but he's young, he'll heal. And you'll have full custody when Robert's gone. How do I apply it without getting it on myself? Wear gloves. Use a different product on yourself. Make sure you document everything as a family beach day for the insurance investigation later. Robert's hands clenched into fists that could have crushed steel. His wife, the mother of his child, had deliberately poisoned them both as part of an elaborate murder plot. There's more, Dell said quietly, her voice tight with controlled rage. She switched to another app that Robert didn't recognize. Bank records. Financial statements. Zoe had been forwarding Robert's business information to an external email address for months. Credit card statements showed massive debts. He knew nothing about online gambling sites, luxury shopping, cash advances that totaled nearly $50,000. She's been bleeding you dry, Dell said. And when that wasn't enough, she decided to collect her life insurance. Robert stared at the screen until his eyes burned. How long? The affair messages go back 8 months. But the money problems. Dell scrolled through more financial records. This stuff goes back at least 2 years. 8 months. Robert's voice was hollow. She's been planning my murder for 8 months. Dell grabbed his shoulders with hands that smelled like flour and vanilla extract. Robert, look at me. This is not your fault. I married her. I trusted her. I let her near my son. You loved her. That's not a crime. Dell's voice was fierce with protective anger. But what she did is multiple crimes that could put her away for life. Robert nodded slowly. The shock was wearing off, replaced by something colder and harder than anything he'd felt since his combat days. This wasn't grief, this was tactical planning. I need copies of everything. Already on it. Dell's phone chimed as files uploaded to cloud storage. Now what? Now I get proof she tried to kill us. Real proof that will hold up in court. Robert spent Tuesday afternoon making calls. First to a private toxicologist in Charleston who specialized in forensic analysis. Then to a lawyer who handled criminal cases. Finally, to Jonah. The sunscreen should be enough for preliminary testing, the toxicologist explained over the phone. If we find foreign compounds, we can identify them and determine concentrations. How long? 72 hours for basic analysis. Longer for detailed breakdown. Do it. The lawyer was equally direct. Don't confront her. Don't change your behavior. Act normal while we build the case. What about my son? Document everything. Photos, medical records, witness statements. And keep him safe. Robert hung up feeling slightly more in control. For the first time since Saturday, he had a plan. That evening, Zoe came home with flowers and takeout from his favorite restaurant. I thought you might not feel like cooking, she said, unpacking containers of barbecue and coleslaw. Thanks. Robert accepted the gesture with a smile that felt like broken glass. How's John feeling? Better. Jonah says the blisters should start healing in a few days. Thank goodness. Zoe touched his arm gently. I feel so guilty about that sunscreen. Not your fault. You couldn't have known. Still, she squeezed his hand. I should have researched it better. Robert met her eyes and saw nothing but concern and love. Either she was a sociopath or an Academy Award-level actress. Did you call the company? He asked. First thing this morning. They were very apologetic. Offered a full refund and compensation for medical expenses. That's good. They also said they'd investigate the batch number. Apparently there might have been contamination during shipping. Smooth. Very smooth. Robert nodded and dug into his barbecue. John will be excited about the money. He's been wanting that new telescope. Of course. Whatever he wants. They ate dinner like a normal family. Zoe helped John with his homework while Robert cleaned the kitchen. She kissed them both good night and went to bed early, claiming exhaustion from worry. Robert waited until her breathing grew steady, then slipped out to the garage. He had work to do. The toxicologist called Thursday morning with preliminary results. You're looking at a cocktail of plant-based photosensitizers, he said. Bergaptan and psoralens in concentrations high enough to cause severe phototoxic reactions. In English, someone mixed compound from certain plants into that sunscreen. When exposed to UV light, they become essentially chemical weapons. Robert felt sick. Weapons. This type of sabotage has been used in agricultural terrorism. Spray it on crops, wait for sunny weather. Watch everything burn. The man's voice was grim. Using it on human skin shows serious intent to harm. Could someone accidentally create this mixture? Absolutely not. These compounds don't occur naturally in sunscreen ingredients. Someone extracted them deliberately and added them in precise ratios. How precise? precise enough to cause severe burns without immediate death. This was calculated to torture, not kill quickly. Robert closed his eyes. Can you prove all this in court? Without question. I'll have detailed analysis and chain of custody documentation ready by tomorrow. That afternoon, Jonah called with more evidence. I've been researching phototoxic compounds, he said. What I found isn't pretty. Tell me, the substances in that sunscreen can cause permanent skin damage, increase cancer risk, and psychological trauma from pain. In children, it can stunt growth and cause developmental issues. Jesus, there's more. The concentration levels suggest whoever did this has chemistry knowledge. This wasn't random mixing, it was precise formulation. Robert thought about Emery Vale, environmental consultant. Could an environmental scientist create this mixture? Absolutely, especially one familiar with plant toxins and photochemistry. Another piece clicked into place. Robert thanked Jonah and hung up. Friday evening, Robert prepared for the confrontation. He'd borrowed a body camera from a security-minded friend, disguised as a baseball cap with a tiny lens hidden in the bill. Dell was standing by at her bakery, ready to call police if needed. John was at a sleepover with his best friend, safely away from whatever was about to happen. Zoe was in the living room, grading papers and watching television. Robert joined her on the couch, moving carefully to keep the camera aimed in her direction. Zoe, I need to ask you something. She looked up from her work. Of course. Robert took a breath. He had to play this perfectly vulnerable enough to make her feel safe, direct enough to get admissions. Did you try to kill me? The papers slipped from her hands. What? The sunscreen. The burns. Were you trying to kill me? Robert, you're scaring me. Of course not. Then why am I and John covered in chemical burns while you don't have a mark on you? Zoe's face cycled through emotion, shock, hurt, confusion. I told you. I used a different formula. Show me the bottle. I threw it away. You said that Monday. Now it's Friday. Show me the receipt. Show me the order confirmation. Show me any proof you actually bought separate sunscreen. Zoe stood up, backing away. I can't believe you're accusing me of this. I'm not accusing. I'm asking. Robert kept his voice calm. Help me understand why my son has second-degree burns and you don't have a tan line. I was in the shade most of the day. You applied that sunscreen with your bare hands. Rubbed it all over our skin. How did none of it get on you? Zoe's mouth opened and closed without sound. Robert pulled out his phone and showed her a photo one Dell had fabricated, showing Emery in handcuffs outside a police station. Emery already told them everything, Robert said quietly. The color drained from Zoe's face. That's not real. He confessed 2 hours ago. Showed them the text messages. Told them about the insurance plan. Robert leaned forward. The only question left is whether you cooperate or go down with him. Zoe stared at the fake photo, hands shaking. He promised me it would be clean. Just make you sick enough to have an accident later. An accident. Boating accident. You spend so much time on the water alone. Her voice was barely a whisper. He said the burns would make you weak, confused. Easy to arrange. Robert felt ice in his veins. And John, I didn't want him to get hurt. Tears started down her cheeks. Emery said a little burn would heal fast in kids. Said he wouldn't remember the pain. But you did it anyway. I couldn't back out. Emery said. He said if I didn't follow through, he'd tell you about the money. About us. I'd lose everything. So you decided to murder me instead. Zoe collapsed back onto the couch, sobbing. I never meant for it to go this far. I just wanted out. I wanted to be happy. By killing your husband and poisoning your son. I thought. She looked up at him with red, desperate eyes. I thought you'd just get sick. Emery said it would look like an allergic reaction. Robert stood up slowly. Every word was being recorded. Every admission was gold in court. One more question, he said. How long have you been stealing from my business accounts? Zoe's face crumpled completely. 2 years. Maybe longer. I got in debt and I couldn't tell you. Then I met Emery and everything seemed possible again. Possible. He loves me, Robert. Really loves me. Not like. She gestured helplessly. Not like this. Not like what? Not like someone who married me because I was convenient. Someone who works 16-hour days and talks to his sister more than his wife. Robert stared at her. So you decided to kill me. I decided to start over. The admission hung in the air between them. Robert walked to the window and looked out at his quiet street, his normal neighborhood, his life that would never be normal again. Pack a bag, he said without turning around. What? Pack a bag. You're leaving tonight. Robert, please. We can work this out. We can go to counseling. I'll pay back every penny. You poisoned my son. It was an accident. I never meant. You poisoned my 9-year-old son to cover up murdering me. Robert turned around, and Zoe flinched at whatever she saw in his face. Pack a bag, or I'll throw you out in your pajamas. Where am I supposed to go? I don't care. Zoe stared at him for a long moment, then went upstairs. Robert heard drawers opening and closing, hangers rattling in the closet. He pulled out his phone and called Delaware. It's done, he said. Call Sheriff Latham. Sheriff Jude Latham had known Dell since high school and Robert since he'd come home from the Navy. When Dell called Friday night with recorded confessions and chemical evidence, Jude cleared his Saturday schedule. Play it again, he said, hunched over Robert's kitchen table with coffee and a legal pad. Robert started the recording from the beginning. Jude took notes, stopping occasionally to ask for clarification. She admitted to poisoning you both. Multiple times. Also admitted to stealing money and planning my murder. And this Emery character, environmental consultant, been having an affair with my wife for 8 months. Robert slid a printed email across the table. Text messages, financial records, the whole thing. Jude studied the documents. Where'd you get these? My son accidentally recorded them while using the family tablet. Accidentally? Screen recording feature. Kid was making game videos. Lucky break. Yeah. Jude leaned back in his chair. The toxicology report is solid. Dr. Mallon can walk you through the medical evidence. The forensic chemist will testify about the compounds. Robert handed over another folder. Chain of custody is clean. What about the wife? Where is she now? Gone. Left last night after the confession. Nowhere. Probably with Emery. She mentioned he has a place near Charleston. Jude nodded and stood up. I'll contact Charleston PD. Get warrants for both of them. How long? Depends on the judge. But with this evidence. Jude tapped the papers. Shouldn't take long. Sunday morning, Jude called with an update. Found them at a hotel in Mount Pleasant. Emery had chemical supplies in his truck, same compounds that were in your sunscreen. Any chance it's coincidental? Not unless he makes a habit of carrying plant toxins around for fun. Jude's voice was dry. They lawyered up fast, but the evidence speaks for itself. When's the arrest? Already done. Both in custody. Robert felt something tight and his chest finally loosened. What now? Now we build the case. Grand jury, formal charges, trial preparation. You ready for a fight? Robert thought about John's bandaged back, the blisters that would leave permanent scars. I'm ready. The trial began 6 months later in Beaufort County Court. The prosecution laid out their case methodically: financial records, text messages, chemical analysis, medical testimony. Zoe had hired an expensive lawyer from Columbia who immediately attacked Robert's character. Ladies and gentlemen, the defense attorney said in his opening statement, this is a case about a controlling husband who discovered his wife's affair and decided to destroy her life out of spite. The lawyer painted Robert as an emotionally distant workaholic who drove his wife into another man's arms. He suggested the sunscreen incident was a tragic accident blown out of proportion by a vindictive ex-husband. Mr. Carver claims his wife tried to murder him with sunscreen, the lawyer said with practiced incredulity. Think about how ridiculous that sounds. But when the prosecution presented their evidence, the defense's narrative crumbled. Dr. Mallon testified about the specific nature of the burns, complete with photographic evidence that made several jurors wince. These are not accidental injuries, he said firmly. The pattern and severity indicate deliberate exposure to phototoxic compounds. The forensic chemist explained how the contaminated sunscreen had been created. The concentration levels were precisely calculated, she said. Too little and there would be no effect. Too much and death would be immediate. Someone with significant chemistry knowledge created this mixture. Emery's lawyer tried to claim his client was innocent, manipulated by a desperate woman. But the text messages between Emery and Zoe, read aloud in court, destroyed that defense. UV-activated compounds will cause maximum pain with minimal immediate danger, the prosecutor read. Perfect for what we need. What about the kid? Came Zoe's response. Acceptable losses. He'll heal. The courtroom was silent when that exchange finished, but the prosecution's strongest moment came when they played Robert's recorded confession. The jury heard Zoe admit to poisoning her husband and son. They heard her discuss the planned boating accident. They heard her express no real remorse, only regret at being caught. When cross-examination began, Zoe's lawyer tried to paint her as a victim of abuse. Mrs. Carver, was your husband controlling? Yes, Zoe said quietly. Did he limit your access to money? Yes. Did he isolate you from friends and family? He worked all the time. We never saw anyone. But the prosecution shredded this narrative on redirect. Mrs. Carver, did your husband prevent you from working? No. Did he prevent you from having your own bank account? No. Did he know about your gambling debts? Zoe hesitated. No. Did he know you'd stolen nearly $50,000 from his business accounts? No. Did he know about your affair with Mr. Vale? No. So when you say he was controlling, you mean he expected honesty from his wife? Objection. Sustained. The prosecutor shifted tactics. Mrs. Carver, when you applied the contaminated sunscreen to your son, did you know it would hurt him? I hoped it wouldn't, but you knew it might. Yes. And you did it anyway. Zoe's voice was barely audible. Yes. The final blow came when John testified. Now 10 years old, he described the beach day in simple, devastating terms. Mommy put the lotion on me and Daddy, he said, looking small in the witness chair. She was really careful to cover everything. Then she used different lotion on herself. Did you ask why she used different lotion? The prosecutor asked gently. Yeah. She said hers was special for her skin type. How did you feel after the beach? It hurt really bad, like fire all over. John's voice was steady but quiet. I couldn't wear shirts for 2 weeks. Do you still have scars? John nodded and pulled up his sleeve, showing faded white marks on his forearm. When John looked across the courtroom at his mother, Zoe broke down completely. Not from guilt, Robert realized, but from the knowledge that she'd lost everything and gained nothing. The jury deliberated for 3 hours. On the charge of attempted murder in the first degree, we find the defendant guilty. Zoe swayed in her chair as the verdict was read. On the charge of conspiracy to commit murder, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of child endangerment, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of insurance fraud, we find the defendant guilty. The judge scheduled sentencing for the following week. Emery, who had been tried separately, received 10 years after pleading guilty and cooperating with prosecutors. At Zoe's sentencing hearing, the judge allowed victim impact statements. Robert stood at the podium and looked directly at his ex-wife. You didn't just try to kill me, he said. You tortured my son to cover your crimes. You poisoned a 9-year-old boy and felt sorry for yourself when you got caught. Zoe stared at her hands. I loved you for 9 years. Trusted you with my life and my child's life. You betrayed that trust in the most evil way possible. Robert's voice never wavered. I will never forgive you. Ever. The judge sentenced Zoe to 25 years in prison. As she was led away in handcuffs, Zoe looked back at Robert one last time. He met her gaze with cold indifference and watched her disappear through the courthouse doors. 1 year later, Robert stood on the dock behind his expanded boat repair shop. Business was better than ever. The trial had brought unexpected publicity, and customers appreciated his reputation for meticulous work. John was at robotics camp, thriving despite the scars that would mark him forever. The boy had grown taller and more confident, no longer flinching when people applied sunscreen at the beach. Dell approached with a letter in her hand. This came to the bakery. Addressed to you. Robert recognized Zoe's handwriting on the envelope. Her final appeal had been denied last month. What's it say? Dell asked. Robert tore open the letter and read silently. 3 pages of self-pity and justification. Pleas for forgiveness. Claims that she'd changed. Promises that she'd never meant to hurt John. When he finished, Robert walked to the end of the dock and held the letter over the water. She says she's sorry, he said. You believe her? Robert thought about John's scars. about the months of nightmares, about the trust that would take years to rebuild. "Doesn't matter," he said, and dropped the letter into the tide. The pages scattered on the current, dissolving in the salt water that had shaped his life and nearly ended it. Robert watched until the last piece disappeared, then turned and walked back toward shore. Behind him, the ocean continued its eternal rhythm, washing away the past and carrying it out to deeper waters where nothing could survive.